about the business property relief, because we've got a new £1 million business property relief allowance.
Yes.
So I'm not quite sure what it was before, but tell us a little bit about what that allowance is, what it means, and specifically the question that came is that transferable between spouses or family members in general?
Yeah, and I think this again is a massive change. And I think interestingly, there's been a lot more chat about the changes to agricultural property relief than there has to business property relief, because the farmers clearly seem to be got their lobbying together a bit better, but the changes are the same for both. At the moment, if an asset qualifies for business property relief, which might be, a partnership interest, a sole trade business, or shares in a trading company, then that is effectively its value for inheritance tax purposes reduced to nil. So there's no inheritance tax on passing down businesses that qualify for business property relief.
So this means that this £1 million allowance, does that mean that if the business is valued or the shares are valued at £1 million, then it still passes down at nil?
Absolutely right.
However, it's valued at 2 million.
Yeah. And this is where the nasty kicks in. And again, it was a bit of a throwaway announcement in the budget. And I think a lot of people kind of were a little slow to pick up on this, but you're absolutely right. So if the value of your business interest, if it qualifies for business property relief, it's less than £1 million, then that is still tax-free. So,
and those who have you passed to still get that uplift? Do they get that double?
Yeah, they still get the double bubble of a capital gains tax uplift on the value of the property when they acquire it as well. So, which was something that I thought would be quite an easy thing for them to change, but happily they didn't. But the kicker now comes in: if your business or your farm is worth more than £1 million, then you get your first £1 million IAHT free, but then after that, you only get 50% relief against the value. So what we're talking about is you're effectively paying inheritance tax at 20% on the value over the £1 million. I think the important thing to emphasize here is that this is in addition to the nil rate ban. So conceivably, if your only assets are really the business, then although the business property relief might only give you £1 million, there might be some extra that you can get on top of that.
But that would be money that has to be paid immediately. So, excuse me, or during the probate process. So, if you passed a business worth £2 million onto your son, he would need to find £200,000 to have that business to be paid cash. And would he have to find that personally? Could he pay it out of the business, or?
I think the first thing to say is that actually, I think the expectation is that there'll actually be a bit like there's some IHT assets where you can apply to pay in installments at the moment. So residential, property, for example, you can apply to pay over 10 years. So I would imagine that the same will apply to this kind of business relief. So it won't necessarily be an immediate thing. But yeah, effectively, that cash will have to be found to pay that IHT liability. And if it's taken out of the business, then there's not going to be any way that you can do that tax-free. So
it would be against the director's loan.
Exactly, director's loan, or you'd have to take it out as a dividend or salary. So
it's personal cost.
So effectively, it's a tax on a tax. Because you're paying tax in order to be able to pay the inheritance tax. Right. But as I say, the expectation at least would be that it will be spread. But in the absence of any other assets, it's hard to see how that can be done without either paying a lot of tax, taking the money out, or even selling the business in order to fund it. And that was the whole point of business relief and agricultural relief, was to stop, the beneficiaries of the estate having to actually sell the business in order to fund the IHT. So, again, this is a massive change.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit more about agricultural relief, because we do have some farming clients on the call actually, and registered to get the recordings. Does that mean agricultural relief, there's another £1 million allowance? So what if I have a farm and I also operate a cafe from my farm building? So I've got a business and a farm. Do I get 2 million?
No, you still only get £1 million, and it's split between the APR and the BPR assets. And I mean, in one sense, you kind of almost.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it's the whole concept is a little short-sighted in my view. But
I think more farms and farming families are going to get caught by this than the government would lead us to believe, that because of what they put in place, 80% of the spot,
Yeah.
it's only the big landowners that are going to be impacted.
It's the classic sort of, if you've got, say, a farm shop,
Mhm.
that's a business rather than a farming activity. So you don't get £1 million for that business and £1 million for the agricultural, and
Mhm.
you'd effectively just have £1 million to share over those assets.
Right.
And I think that the other point that we sort of touched on, does that get transferred as a from spouse to spouse on death? So if
I remembered, thank you.
if we look at the nil rate ban that everybody has, then if you're married spouses or civil partners, then on the first death, as long as that's not used up, then that can be transferred to the sort of partner, or sort of the married partner.
But if it is used up, it's not an addition to.
Yeah. But I think with that, so that's the kind of normal 325k nil rate band. If it's used up, you can't transfer it. So if I gifted 325 grand's worth to my son, for example, on death, and the rest went to my wife, then that 325 that would go to Toby would effectively mean that my 325 is used up, and my wife wouldn't get that as an extra for her in the future. But if I just gave everything to Helen, my wife, then she would get my full 325 plus potentially the residence nil rate band. The kicker with the business relief £1 million is that doesn't look like it's going to transfer. So effectively, if I don't use it, if I had a business worth £1 million, I passed it to my wife, she wouldn't get my £1 million allowance for that as well whenever she passes it down.
Right.
So which potentially is really problematic. And I think what it's going to mean is that a lot of people are going to need to do a bit more planning in advance of death, because again, the old thing was, well, I can just die and pass it on and it's fine. People are going to look at ways to kind of use up my £1 million before I pass away, rather, because otherwise it is a use it or lose it kind of thing. So you might look at people that are gifting business assets early to use up their £1 million, even popping assets into a trust up to the value of £1 million in order to use that up to make sure that on my death it doesn't get lost. So the whole planning concept is really going to change quite a lot. So we're